Framework 16 is the most unique laptop I've ever tested. It offers an unprecedented level of customization, repairability, and upgradability. Take this for example. This is a Radeon GPU that you can just slot in the back, making laptop GPU upgrades fast and simple. The design looks professional and the finish feels nice and premium. The bottom shell is magnesium alloy, and although the lid is CNC aluminum, that didn't stop there being more lid flex than I was ready for. It felt kind of floppy when twisting it, so I guess just don't do that, because it was perfectly fine using it normally. There's no screen wobble, even when typing hard, and it feels perfectly fine when opening the lid, so yeah, it's not a problem in practice. There is some keyboard flex when pushing down hard, which isn't that surprising considering you can remove the keyboard. More on that shortly. But it didn't seem too different compared to many other laptops I've tested. I seem to have a similar amount of flex underneath the keyboard as Alex in the LTT review, so maybe it just doesn't bother me as much. My configuration has AMD's Ryzen 7 7840HS processor and the optional Radeon RX 7700S graphics module. This costs an extra $400 and isn't required, but it's an upgrade option if you ever want to add more GPU power. Installation of the graphics module is as simple as taking off the magnetic keyboard, undoing some screws, sliding out the expansion bay, and slotting in the graphics module, all of which is documented in depth on Framework's website. From start to finish, I was able to go through the whole process in just over 2 minutes. And I had a camera awkwardly sitting between me and the laptop. It's a little thicker at the rear with the graphics module installed, and overall it feels a bit bigger compared to most other 16-inch gaming laptops I've tested. It's heavier with the graphics module installed too, as it contains extra cooling for the GPU. Fortunately, the 180W Type-C GAN charger is on the smaller side. Alright, here's where things start getting fun. You can pick where the keyboard and touchpad go based on your personal preferences. Basically, you line them up with the dotted lines and just slide them into position and let the magnets do the work. It's super easy to change anytime, even with the laptop running. Everything connects with these 8-pin connectors, which use USB 2.0 and are rated for 10,000 cycles. So change away. You can put the keyboard in the middle with some spaces on the sides, or you can put the keyboard on the left or right. You can either put the spaces in the empty spot, which are available in different colors, or even with LED lighting strips that can be customized to show things like battery life, current time, or alerts. Or you can add in a numpad or RGB macro pad based on whatever you prefer. The software for managing the light strips feels super early. It didn't work very well, but I assume that will be updated. The same goes for the touchpad. You can put it on the left, right, or in the middle based on your preference. I think it works best having it centered with regards to the letter keys, but the fact that you can decide for yourself is a whole new level of customization I've never seen before. My only complaints are that the numpad has white backlighting only, so if you spend $50 extra to upgrade to the RGB keyboard that mine has, then they don't match. The macro pad does have RGB, and by default the keys are mapped to a numpad, but the keycaps are clear so it can get quite bright. And sometimes the fit of the spaces is a bit janky and not perfectly flush with everything else. But it's not really a problem unless you're a perfectionist. Keys can be customized with VIA, so through a browser without any software needed. But there are also a number of shortcuts built into the keys for cycling through the effects and granular adjustment. Possibly too many to remember, but they're listed here on Framework's website. There are a number of built-in effects for the RGB keyboard with much more customization compared to most other laptops. And all keys and secondary functions get lit up. Key brightness is adjusted between 3 levels by holding function and pressing the spacebar, while the numpad is adjusted separately by pressing enter with numlock off. But it's far dimmer in comparison compared to the RGB keyboard. You can't customize both together. As for functionality, typing on the keyboard worked well. It has 1.5mm of key travel, and I had no problems with it. Though I prefer keys with a slightly clickier feel. The glass touchpad might not be as big as some other laptops, but it was still nice to use, worked well, and clicks anywhere. There's a fingerprint scanner built into the power button, which I found to work fast and accurately. The power button was kinda bright by default, but you can customize it between 3 different brightness levels in the BIOS. The ports are super interesting, because Framework has an expansion card system that allows you to pick the ports you want and customize the layout. to a degree. Basically, you pick up to 6 expansion cards which connect to the laptop with a Type-C connection. They've got options for USB Type-A, Type-C, HDMI 2.0B, full-size DisplayPort 1.4, micro SD card slot with normal full-size SD slot coming soon, and 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, though that one sticks out a little. You can even just straight up install extra SSD space with these modules. This image from Framework's website shows what all the slots support, so you can have Type-C charging with up to 240 watts on either side. You just have to use ports 1, 2, 4, or 5. The display outputs are also closer to the back, but the trade-off is only the rear ports have faster USB 4 if that's something you need. So you can use Type-C to charge the laptop on either side, which is great, and I confirmed that you can still charge the laptop even without the Type-C expansion card installed. Yeah, it's a bit more awkward to connect the power cable for charging, but hey, this does mean that you can still charge the laptop without spending $9 on a Type-C expansion card. And same goes for data transfer. I could install a really thin USB stick. If you've got the discrete graphics expansion bay installed, there's an additional Type-C port on the back which can be used as a display output, and it's the only one that connects directly to the discrete graphics. I confirmed data transfer works on this, but Framework don't seem to specify what version of USB it uses. You can also connect the expansion cards to it if you want to use HDMI or DisplayPort instead of Type-C. All of the expansion cards on the side, whether you're using DisplayPort or HDMI, always connect to the integrated graphics of the processor. As HDMI is 2.0B, we're limited to 8-bit 4K 60Hz. I also had a problem with the monitor and HDMI cable I've used to test hundreds of laptops without issue. Basically, the expansion card keeps appearing and disappearing in Device Manager, and the screen doesn't get a signal. And this happens with both the latest drivers from AMD and the slightly older package provided by Framework. But other monitors and TVs I have worked fine though. Getting inside is easy and requires taking off the keyboard, touchpad, and spacers. Then you simply pull out the cable listed as step number 1, loosen 16 screws in the labeled order with the included TR5 screwdriver, and pull off the metal midplate, as documented on their website. It's cool that you don't need any fancy pry tools to open it up, and that there aren't any screws visible externally, despite how much customization is on offer. Inside, we've got the battery down the front, 2 DDR5 memory slots in the middle towards the right, Wi-Fi 6E card up the top on the left, and the 2 M.2 storage slots below that. There's room for a shorter 2230 M.2 SSD underneath the longer 2280 slot. I confirmed my 4TB 2280 SSD with chips on both sides could fit, but that was with the 2230 slot empty, as I don't have a drive that size. Considering that the expansion bay design is open source, I'd expect someone to make an M.2 expansion option, given that there are 8 lanes of PCIe Gen 4 connectivity available for the GPU module. The speeds from the installed 512GB PCIe Gen 4 SSD were great, but this will vary depending on the SSD you choose when ordering, or install yourself if you buy the DIY version. Wi-Fi speed was excellent, the second fastest result I've ever measured, and only beaten by Lenovo's more expensive Legion 9 gaming laptop. Alright, so I've got this graph where I attempt to give points based on how upgradable a laptop is. And if we go purely based off of my normal scoring system, it ends up about the same as most other laptops, slightly better. This is kind of arbitrary though. For context, I give a point per M.2 storage slot and RAM slot, which is why MSI's Titan is up the top. Framework gets an extra point for the upgradable GPU, but loses half a point for one of the M.2 slots only supporting smaller devices. But perhaps something like this is more accurate once you account for everything else, like the option to upgrade from a white to RGB keyboard in future, or change the ports, or easily swap the screen to some future panel. There are just too many options, and it's difficult to do a fair comparison based on past metrics, because the Framework 16 is in a league of its own here. The speakers are found on the left and right sides towards the front. I thought they sounded okay. There's some nice bass, but they're a bit muffled and weren't as clear as I'd like. The Latencymon results were excellent. Most gaming laptops I've tested in the last few years failed poorly here. The Framework 16 is powered by an 85 watt-hour battery. There's no built-in software, but with the dynamic refresh rate set, Windows should still automatically lower the screen's refresh rate when you unplug the charger to help save battery. Battery life was great, lasting for just over 9 hours in the YouTube video playback test, without the graphics module installed and the screen at 60 Hz. Though I'd expect it to be much the same, as that workload shouldn't run on the discrete graphics anyway. The battery test with the game running used the graphics module though. Framework notes that the battery will drain in heavy workloads due to the smaller 180 watt Type-C charger. After our game benchmarks, it lowered about 5% over a couple of hours, but with idle periods in between games to charge. During my thermal testing, so a heavy combined CPU and GPU stress test, it lost about 15% after a couple of hours. So not ideal, but not an issue with multiple hours of heavy use. Let's check out thermals next. There are 3 heat pipes over the Ryzen processor, which is covered by a liquid metal pad. There are 2 Cooler Master fans in the expansion base shell, and they're a little bigger in the graphics module. The graphics module also has some heat pipes covering the GPU, which are physically separate to the CPU cooling. Most gaming laptops share heat pipes between the CPU and GPU, but that's not the case here. There are holes directly above the air intake fans on both the shell and graphics module, as well as vents above the keyboard at the back. Air gets exhausted out of the left and right sides, but also out of the back with the graphics module installed. Right now, in February 2024, the Framework forums seem to indicate that they don't plan on making any special software in order to customize things like fan speed or CPU and GPU power limits. But I'll be extremely surprised if we don't see some sort of community software option coming soon. Instead, they've suggested changing the Windows power settings. So we've done all testing with best performance enabled for all tests that had the charger connected, or best efficiency to improve battery life. I've got the temperatures with the expansion shell installed below, so without discrete graphics, and the results with the graphics module installed above. So with the RX 7700S GPU, the internal temps were fine at idle, but warmer with the discrete graphics installed and actively driving the screen. The rest of the results are from combined CPU and GPU stress tests, which aim to represent a worst-case full-load scenario. Running with the lid closed in a docked scenario was only a little warmer on the GPU, but otherwise there aren't any problems if you want to dock the laptop and load it up. The cooling pad I test with, linked below, was able to lower temps by almost 3 degrees Celsius. And as you'll hear soon, it also resulted in less fan noise. These are the clock speeds during the same stress tests. There's barely any difference with closing the lid or using a cooling pad, because thermals were not a limitation in this particular workload. The CPU clock speed is a little lower with the integrated graphics loaded up, as they share a power budget. If I stop the GPU workload, the CPU would max out at 4.6 GHz over all 8 cores. We can see here the processor was using 54 watts with the CPU and GPU under load, but it lowered to around 40 watts when I paused the GPU load. The RX 7700S runs at around 80 watts with the CPU under load at the same time, but if I stop the CPU load, then a GPU only load is able to run at 100 watts, which is what AMD's spec sheet says is the maximum. It's possible that thermals will be even better than what I've shown here, because I was told a few weeks ago that Framework's thermal module supplier has improved their soldering process on the vapor chamber, which lowers thermal resistance. Apparently, the change was only intended to improve manufacturing yield, but it actually ended up improving thermals a bit too. Now, that said, although this is a slightly earlier model, it's still what Framework considers to be a representation of what you as an end customer might actually buy, because it performs as expected. But yeah, basically, it's possible that you might get something that performs a little better in terms of thermals. The CPU settled in at 54 watts in a CPU-only workload like Cinebench, with the GPU now idle. It's scoring about the same as a number of other Zen 4 laptops that we've tested. The higher tier Ryzen 9 7940HS is much the same when it comes to multi-core performance, only seeing a small boost to single-core performance for the most part. Multi-core performance depends on how much power the chip gets fed. Framework also offers this laptop with that chip, but it's a $200 upgrade. So based on what we're seeing from other 7940HS results here, I'd say that's probably not worth it for most of you. CPU. CPU performance lowers if we unplug the charger and instead run off of battery power, but it's now one of the better results out of the same selection of laptops. In fact, many of the 8-core Ryzen laptops are now on the upper part of the graph, ahead of Intel options with more than double the core count. Basically, this means that, generally speaking, AMD laptops are more power efficient and offer better performance while running on battery power. Of course, that's not always the case, as we can see here, but the Framework 16 is doing a good job compared to most others. Most laptops I test are in the low 30 degrees Celsius range on the keyboard at idle, and the Framework 16 was mostly below this with just the expansion shell, so no discrete graphics. It's a little warmer with the discrete graphics connected, but not by much and still cool. There appears to be a hotspot near where I've plugged in the charger, but it barely feels warm. It's only a little warm to the touch if I run a CPU and GPU stress test with the expansion shell. Not bad at all, but it's actually cooler in the same workload with the discrete graphics connected. And that's because the fans are doing more work now to keep it cool. Let's have a listen. The fans were off and completely silent when idling, with or without the discrete graphics. It's a fair bit louder with the stress test running with the discrete graphics connected, but it's still in line with most other gaming laptops tested. Normal stuff. Along with lowering temps slightly, the cooling pad also allowed the fans to run a bit quieter too. The Framework 16 is using a taller 16x10 screen, which means more viewable screen space as there are more pixels vertically compared to a standard 16x9 panel. Most other laptops that have gone the 16x10 route don't have this thick bottom chin down the bottom, but this might just be required in order to accommodate the extra depth of the laptop to get the GPU in the back. I don't know, I'm sure some of you won't like it, but I don't think it looks that bad. And it also means that the screen is actually raised up a little, which is beneficial if you're staring at the screen for hours on end. You don't have to tilt your head quite as far down. The screen looks great. Color gamut and screen brightness are excellent for both gaming and even content creation. Framework advertises it as a 500 nit panel, and we hit this at full brightness, which is a great result compared to a lot of other laptops. 300 nits is the bare minimum I want to see, but 500 definitely looks better. Backlight bleed was fine in my unit, but this will vary between panels. Framework spec sheet says that the screen has a 9 millisecond Ryzen full response time. I measured closer to 11 milliseconds if we're talking about going from white to black and then black to white, but 7 milliseconds once accounting for more data points. It's only beaten by other laptops that either have overdrive modes or use OLED, but it's not bad at all either. Ideally, we want 6 milliseconds for transitions to occur within the 165Hz refresh window, but we're not far off. Honestly, for most people, this is perfectly fine for gaming, no problems. The total system latency is the amount of time between a mouse click and when a gunshot appears on the screen in Counter-Strike 2. This is our first time showing CS2 results after moving from CSGO, but it's the fastest result we've recorded so far. Despite not having a super fast screen or top-end specs, Framework excelled here for some reason. The Framework 16 has Smart Access Graphics, which is AMD's dynamic MUX solution, comparable to NVIDIA's Advanced Optimus. The Radeon software lets you use it, or the standard hybrid mode, aka Optimus On. We couldn't find a way to force it to always only use the discrete graphics. This works okay for the most part, but it feels a little more clunky compared to NVIDIA's solution. It took longer to swap between GPUs, and there was just less stability during our testing, with more crashes or things not running properly. There's a 1080p 60fps camera above the screen with privacy switches for both camera and microphones, but it does not have IR for Windows Hello Face Unlock. Here's how the camera and microphones look and sound, and this is what it sounds like while typing on the keyboard. Alright, let's find out how well the Framework 16 performs in games. All testing has been done with the RX 7700S. Cyberpunk 2077 was tested with our own custom test run, and I've got the Framework 16 shown by the red highlight. At 1080p, it's similar in average FPS compared to a number of RTX 4060 gaming laptops. That's still the case at the higher 1440p resolution, where we're more GPU bound, and the 7700S in the Framework 16 was 16% faster compared to the lower tier 7600S in ASUS's TUF A16. Red Dead Redemption 2 was tested with the game's benchmark, And this is a game that I've found to prefer AMD's Radeon graphics over Nvidia's GeForce. This is why the 7700S in the Framework 16 is able to beat a number of RTX 4070 gaming laptops, and even come within range of Razer's far more expensive Blade 16 with RTX 4090. The Blade is further ahead at 1440p, as the GPU does more work with more pixels to produce. But the 7700S was still beating a number of RTX 4070 gaming laptops. A great result. But then on the other hand, some games like Control prefer Nvidia graphics, which is why the 7700S in the Framework 16 was now beaten by the RTX 4060 laptops. At 1440p, it's quite close to the RTX 3060 from a few years ago. Granted, that has less VRAM, but it just goes to show that some games prefer Nvidia and others prefer AMD, which is why we test a mixture. Here are the 3D Mark results for those that find them useful. As for content creation, like the games, it's close to RTX 4060 and 4070 laptops in Adobe Photoshop and DaVinci Resolve. However, as is usually the case, Radeon graphics generally don't do as well in other workloads like Adobe Premiere and Blender. It's using inside BIOS, just like a Clevo laptop. There's a little customization available, but not a whole lot in the way of tuning. I was surprised that there wasn't a MUX Switch option to force the laptop to run only on the discrete graphics. If I had to guess, that might be problematic to handle if you've got it enabled and then remove or swap the graphics module. Linux support was tested with an Ubuntu 23.10 live CD. By default, the keyboard, touchpad, camera, speakers, and Wi-Fi all worked fine. Keyboard shortcuts for screen brightness, key brightness, and RGB effects, and volume all work. A great result, and not at all surprising considering they designed it with Linux in mind. Pricing and availability will change over time, so check the link below the video for updates. And if the Framework 16 has a good sale, we'll be sure to add it to our gaminglaptop.deals website. We update that every day to include all of the latest sales, so make sure that you check it out regularly to save money on your next gaming laptop. At the time of recording, the do-it-yourself version without any SSD or RAM starts from $1,399 with an extra $200 getting you the higher tier Ryzen 9 7940HS processor. But honestly, from my personal experience, I don't think it's worth spending that much money for most people, unless you really want the slightly better single-core performance. You'd probably be better off saving that money today and putting it towards a CPU upgrade in future. The graphics module adds an extra $400, but if you want both to have the option of swapping between them, then it's $500 to get it in addition to the expansion shell. The 180-watt power adapter costs an extra $79. But given a lot of people already have good Type-C chargers, I think it's good to have the option of not being forced into buying it if you don't need it. And hey, considering heavy combined CPU and GPU workloads could drain the battery with the 80-watt charger, maybe you might want to look for a 240-watt charger anyway, as this laptop can apparently support that. The pre-built option costs more as it comes with RAM, storage, and Windows installed. If I spec it out to what I've tested in this video, at the end of the day, we're looking at close to $2,200. Definitely not cheap. I mean, for that amount of money, it's possible to get a much better performing gaming laptop with RTX 4080 graphics and nicer feeling build quality. So with the Framework 16, you're really paying a premium for the customization and promise of future upgradability. If you're just after good FPS for the dollar, then you'd be better off spending half that amount on a similarly performing RTX 4060 gaming laptop. The Framework 16 is certainly unique, offering levels of customization and repairability that I've never seen from any other laptop. If these things are important to you and you want the option of adding in discrete graphics for gaming or other workloads, then this is by far the best option right now. Future CPU, GPU, and even port upgrades are definitely promising. But this isn't the first time that we've heard of laptops attempting to provide this. Now, to be fair, Framework does at least have some track record with the Framework 13, as they've been providing CPU upgrades for that. So if we will see next-gen CPUs and GPUs just slot right into this laptop, then yeah, that's gonna be awesome. This might just be the last laptop that you ever need to buy if all goes to plan. Just be ready to pay for those benefits, because they do not come cheap. And there are plenty of other new gaming laptops coming out this year. Check out this video next to find out everything that's on the way.